The winter of 2019 was colder than anything I'd ever seen. This quiet felt heavy and wrong. Just wrong. Then the call came in about a missing man named Daniel Kerr. I got to the pullout with a younger ranger named Ellis. We looked at the tracks leading away from the machine. There wasn't a single other sign of a struggle or a reason to leave. We followed his trail for a mile through the pines. Every 100 yards, he'd just stop and stand there. It looked like he was watching something, but the snow was empty. Near a drainage, the trail got weird. I found a handprint where he'd fallen to one knee. Right next to it was a piece of plastic that looked like a camera casing. We found his camera hanging from a branch 7 feet up. There weren't any boot marks under it or signs of climbing. The lens was cracked, and the battery compartment was wide open. We went deeper into a part of the woods full of thermal vents. His tracks just stopped dead in the snow. There wasn't a single footprint beyond that point. Then my radio clicked, and it wasn't just static. Daniel's voice came through, totally flat, saying he could see our lights. I tried to get him to answer, but he just repeated the same thing. The voice came again, but it wasn't from the radio this time. It came from the trees right in front of us. Then something to our left answered me using my own voice. So we started backing out, but the woods just kept repeating what we said. We got back to the camera tree and saw new tracks in the snow. They were bare footprints, long and narrow, like they barely touched the ground. Something moved in the trees ahead of us. It was a pale shoulder, way too high off the ground. We didn't wait around, we just ran. We were half a mile from the sleds when we found his pack. It was sitting upright in the middle of the trail like someone had placed it there. I opened it up and saw the radio inside, but the battery compartment was empty. Then my radio clicked, and I heard his voice whisper, "Thank you." I dropped the pack, and we just started running. We were stumbling through the dark timber while something followed us without making a sound. When we got back to the road, Ellis stopped dead. His snowmobile was sitting 20 yards off the road with the headlight on. The engine was off, and the key was gone. Then a voice came from the trees that sounded just like dispatch. It asked us to confirm we had eyes on the missing man. Ellis just started shaking his head. He couldn't take it. I jumped on my sled and told Ellis to get on. As I turned the key, the voice from the trees whispered that it could see our lights. The engine finally started, and I drove as fast as I could. I looked back and saw a headlight following us through the storm. There was no rider, just a pale shape folded over the handlebars. It had a face like wet clay, and it was staring right at us. The road curved hard, and I barely kept us on the path. Behind us, the other snowmobile didn't turn at all. It just slid off the road and vanished into the trees. We made it back to the station after midnight, both of us shaking. We tried to tell them what happened, but it sounded like madness. They separated us and started ignoring everything that didn't fit their report. The next morning, they found the sled parked upright with the key in the ignition. There were no tracks around it at all. They just called it confusion and moved on. Months later, an older man found me outside the office. He told me that some places remember hunger and some things learn by listening. He said a voice in the dark is just asking for permission to become familiar. I quit my job before the next winter. I thought leaving would put an end to the nightmare. I moved away and sold my gear. But some things don't care about distance. Last December, I was living in a small rental house. The porch light flickered in the cold. A storm rolled in overnight. It felt like the park was reaching out to find me. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up. I heard a radio clicking in the hallway. I didn't own a radio anymore. The sound echoed through the quiet house. I sat there in the dark. A voice spoke from outside my door. It wasn't Daniel or Ellis. It was my own voice. I didn't move. I heard bare feet on the wooden floor. The footsteps were slow and light. They stopped right outside my bedroom. The doorknob turned once. It let me know it could open. My voice whispered through the crack. I moved out the next day. I've moved twice since then. I keep no radios or cameras. I sleep with the curtains closed. I know how this sounds to others. Maybe that's easier to believe. Maybe it's kinder. But if you're in Yellowstone in winter, you need to remember what I've told you. If you hear someone calling, don't answer. If it uses your name, step back. If it repeats you, you leave. If your radio starts talking with no battery, don't try to understand. Understanding is how it keeps you there. Turn off your light and walk away. Don't give it another word to learn. He can smell the fear off of you. And you can't hide. Because everyone is afraid. And in every generation, it needs to feed. And you will not be able to escape. That memory of that forest still clings to me like frost. I see the trees in my dreams, standing like silent sentinels in the dark. Once it's heard your voice, it's a place that never truly lets you go. I often wonder if Daniel is still out there, wandering the timber. Maybe he's part of the silence now, waiting for the next person to stumble into his trap. That thought is enough to keep me up nights. I remember the way the radio clicked that night. It was not the sound of a device failing, but the sound of something waking up. It was a sound that didn't belong in the natural world. The forest has a way of mimicking us. It takes our voices and our fears, and it turns them into something else. It's a hunger that never stops growing, feeding on the things we leave behind. I still hear it in my sleep sometimes. The voice, calm and close, saying the same words over and over. It is a reminder that some things are better left unknown, and some paths should never be walked. I moved away, but the distance didn't change anything. The forest is not just a place. It is a memory that follows you home. It waits in the quiet, listening for the moment you let your guard down. If you ever find yourself in Yellowstone, be careful. The silence isn't empty. It's full of things just waiting to be heard. Don't let them hear you, and don't let them know you were listening. The truth is, some things are not meant to be understood. They are meant to be feared and avoided. My story is just a warning, a small piece of a much larger, darker truth that hides in the trees. Somewhere beyond Slough Creek, in the timber where Daniel Kerr's tracks ended, something is still listening. It remembers every voice it has ever been given, and it is always waiting for more. So, if you hear your name called from the dark, do not answer. Just turn off your light, lower your head, and walk away. It's the only way to keep your own voice for yourself. I often think about the silence that settled over the northern range that winter. It wasn't just a lack of noise, it was a heavy, suffocating presence. You could feel the park watching you, waiting for a single mistake. Daniel Kerr was just a name on a report back then. He had all the right gear, but the wilderness doesn't care about your plans. It only cares about what it can take from you. When I arrived, the wind was dragging powder across the road. I looked at the tracks leading into the timber. There were no other prints, just his, walking straight into the dark. Ellis tried to stay practical, looking for signs of wildlife. But the forest was unnervingly empty. Every 100 yards, Daniel had stopped, as if watching something we couldn't see. Then we found a piece of plastic, a fragment of a camera casing. It was scratched and clawed, lying in the snow. I put it in an evidence bag, but I didn't tell Ellis what I really thought. We found the camera hanging from a branch 7 feet off the ground. It wasn't caught, it was placed. The lens was cracked, and the battery compartment was empty. The drainage led us into a part of the forest that wasn't on any map. The air grew warmer, and the smell of sulfur drifted through the trees. It felt like the ground itself was exhaling. Daniel's tracks stopped abruptly between 2 thermal vents. Both boots were planted together, facing forward. There was nothing beyond them, just clean, untouched snow. Then my radio clicked, a deliberate, rhythmic sound. Daniel Kerr's voice came through, flat and calm. He said, "I can see your lights." My blood turned to ice. Ellis froze, and I grabbed the radio, trying to get a location. But there was no answer, just the same words repeated in that hollow tone. The forest felt like it was closing in, and I knew we were in danger. Then the voice came again, not from the radio, but from the trees. It was Daniel's voice, flat and hollow, echoing through the timber. Ellis raised his headlamp, but the forest remained still and empty. I called out Daniel's name, hoping for a sign. Something answered from our left. It was my own voice, perfectly mimicked, repeating the name. Ellis looked at me, and I saw the color drain from his face. Fear pinned us to the spot. For 5 seconds, neither of us could move or speak. Then Ellis whispered that we needed to best out. I just nodded, unable to find my own voice. We began retreating slowly along our own tracks. The radio clicked again. This time, it was Ellis's voice coming through the speaker. He stopped dead in his tracks, paralyzed by the sound. The forest began to repeat us, phrases coming from different directions. It was as if something was testing us. We reached the tree where we found the camera. I saw new tracks in the snow. They were bare footprints, long and narrow. It looked as though whatever made them weighed almost nothing. They circled the tree once and then crossed our trail. Then something moved in the timber ahead of us. It wasn't a charge, just a shape passing behind the trees. It was tall, pale, and moved with a slow, controlled grace. I raised my rifle, and the shape stopped. For a second, I saw a bare shoulder, gray-white in the cold. And then it slid behind a tree and vanished. We moved faster then, not running, but close to it. The storm thickened, and our tracks began to fill with snow. Every few minutes, something called from the dark using Daniel's voice. I told Ellis not to answer it. Part of me knew the rule before I understood the danger. We were half a mile from the snowmobiles. We found Daniel's pack sitting upright in the trail. I knelt beside the pack and opened the top flap. Inside were his gloves, a water bottle, and his radio. The battery compartment was open and empty. Then my radio clicked on my shoulder. Daniel's voice whispered through it. He said thank you, and I dropped the pack. Ellis grabbed me, and we started to run. It was pure animal panic through the deep snow. Branches whipped our faces as we stumbled forward. Behind us, something moved without effort. I never heard it run. All they was hearing was the soft sound of bare feet touching snow. The snowmobiles came into view as dim shapes. I felt relief hit me so hard. Then Ellis stopped, staring at his machine. His machine was facing the tree line. The engine was off, and the key was missing. Then a voice came from the trees, sounding like dispatch. I yelled for Ellis to climb on behind me. I turned the key, and the engine coughed. The voice from the trees became Daniel again. I drove too fast through the storm. Then I saw lights behind us. Ellis's snowmobile was following, but there was no rider. I looked back and saw a pale shape crouched over the seat. It was folded over the handlebars, wearing Daniel's jacket. The face looked smooth, like skin over wet clay. The road curved hard near a stand of timber. I corrected at the last second. Behind us, the other snowmobile slid off the road and vanished. We finally made it back to Mammoth after midnight. We were both shaking and barely able to speak. The cold was bad, but the terror was worse. They separated us right away, which is standard. I told them everything from the very beginning. I described the tracks, the voices, and the snowmobile, but they just stared. The guy interviewing me barely wrote anything down. The next morning, a search team went out. They didn't let Ellis or me go back out there. They found Ellis's snowmobile 3 miles away. It wasn't crashed or damaged at all. It was just parked there, upright, with the key still in it. The official report started to change. They said the tracks were just from wind and heat. They called the riderless snowmobile a case of confusion. That's how they make reports sound believable. You just sand off the edges that don't fit. Daniel was never found, and his messenger turned up in a locked shed. Ellis transferred out before spring. He ended up leaving the service entirely. He called me once, sounding broken, and asked if I heard it in my sleep. I knew exactly what he was talking about. Sometimes, right before I woke up, I'd hear Daniel's voice. It was calm and close, saying, "I can see your lights." 6 months later, a tribal consultant came through. He found me outside and asked about the search. He looked at the mountains and asked if it had repeated me. My hands went cold when he asked that. He didn't give me a name for it, and I'm glad. He just said, "Some places remember hunger, and some things learn by listening." He told me that a voice in the dark isn't always asking for help. Sometimes it's just asking for permission to become familiar. I quit my job before the next winter, thinking that leaving the park would be enough to escape it. But distance didn't remove the things that had followed me. Last December, I was living in a small rental house outside Livingston. A storm rolled in overnight, bringing the familiar sound of wind and creaking wood. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of a radio clicking in the hallway. I didn't even own a park radio anymore, but the sound was unmistakable. It was the same rhythmic static I had heard in the woods. I sat there in the dark, listening to my own breathing, when a voice spoke from the hallway. It wasn't Daniel's voice, and it wasn't Ellis's. It was my own voice, perfectly replicated, whispering in the shadows. It said, very quietly, "Unit 6, confirm you have visual." I didn't move, and I didn't answer, paralyzed by the realization that it had followed me home. I just stared at the bedroom door, waiting for what would happen next. After a while, I heard footsteps crossing the hallway. Bare feet on the wooden floor, moving slow, light, and almost polite. They stopped right outside my bedroom door, and the doorknob turned just enough to let me know it could open. Then my own voice whispered through the crack beneath the door, "I can see your lights." I moved out the very next day, and I've moved twice since then. I'm trying to outrun something that doesn't need a map to find me. I keep no radios in the house now, and no cameras with removable batteries. I don't use porch lights that face the timber. I sleep with the curtains closed, even in the middle of summer. People will call it stress, trauma, or a shared hallucination. Maybe that's easier to believe. But if you ever find yourself in Yellowstone during the dead of winter, remember what I told you. If you hear someone calling from the trees, don't answer. If it calls your name, step back. And if your radio speaks without a battery, just turn off your light and walk away. Somewhere out there, something is still listening. I think it remembers every voice it has ever been given. It collects them like trophies in the dark. My story is just one, many swallowed by that silence. The park doesn't care about our reports or our files. It doesn't care about the clean versions we write. It only cares about the hunger beneath the snow. I still see the trees in my dreams, swaying without wind. I still hear the radio clicking in the hallway. The sound is a reminder that I'm still being watched. Maybe the tribal consultant was right. Maybe it wasn't asking for help at all. Maybe it was just learning how to be me. I don't go back to the mountains anymore. I don't even look at the horizon when the sun starts to set. I know what's waiting out there, and I know it's patient. The silence in the house is the worst part. It feels heavy, like it's waiting for me to say something. I keep the curtains closed to keep the world out. If you ever find yourself in Yellowstone, don't be fooled by the beauty. The steam, the snow, the quiet, it's all a mask. There's something ancient and hungry hiding in the trees. So if you hear your name called from the dark, don't answer. If you hear your own voice coming back at you, run. Don't give it anything more to learn, because somewhere beyond Slough Creek, it's still waiting. It's still listening. And it remembers every single voice it has ever been given. I'm not gonna say anything else. I've said enough. I'm gonna turn off the light and try to sleep.